One of the things you spoke about there is about values, and much of what you talk about in your book centers around understanding what our real values are and our goals and what we should be aiming for and how to deal with certain situations. Your brand new book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, which I love, by the way, for many reasons. I love it because you don't have to read it all in one sitting. Yeah. You can skip to the key parts that are relevant to you. As is the case with all your content, it's super inclusive. So it doesn't feel like, I've got psychology books on my bookshelf over there that are, I have to do one page at a time and like have a massage to get through each paragraph because it's difficult. But this is super inclusive whilst also being incredibly important in its subject matter. So values and goals, what is the difference? What is a value?
Sure. So the way I would talk about sort of values and goals in therapy is really around a goal is something that once you achieve it, once you get there, it's done. So, your goal might be to get through your exams. Okay, exams are over, you passed, done. A value doesn't finish or end. It's a pathway. If you imagine your life as a journey, for example, it's a path that extends the whole of your life. And it's something that you choose to always stay close to when you can. And I think, life will always take you in different directions. So sometimes life will pull you away from a particular value, but it's really about always evaluating and knowing where that path is so that you can pull back in that direction. So for example, when your career starts to take over because it's so busy and then you think, I haven't spoken to my girlfriend all week. That's you going, that path's too far away now. I'm pulling back. I need to head back in this direction because this is important to me. And so it's a kind of, winding path where you're sometimes you're pulling away from it and sometimes you're going back towards it. And something that I included in the book was these sort of little values check-ins that I would do and we do in therapy where we look at, okay, just look at the different areas of your life. It doesn't have to be rocket science, doesn't have to be really kind of airy-fairy. It's looking at, okay, what's important to you in your life? You might have family, intimate relationships, health, creativity, lifelong learning, career, contribution, those kind of things. And then you could literally kind of split it up into boxes and put in each box words, what's really crucial is it's not what happens to you. It's not what you want to happen to you. It's how you want to respond to things, how you want to be in that area of your life, what kind of person you want to be. So let's say you were looking at your, romantic relationships. What kind of boyfriend do I actually want to be? What kind of partner do I want to be? What do I want to represent to that person? And how do I want to come at difficulties? How do I want to sort of respond to problems that we face? And that kind of thing. So it's all looking at the attitude that you bring to that situation in your life or that area of your life. And you might come up with words that then kind of resonate or, maybe, I don't know, maybe in your work life, maybe enthusiasm is a word that you just hold close to you and that becomes one of your values. And so you can then, and sort of exercise that's in the book is you can almost rate, okay, how important is it to me to be enthusiastic in my work? Maybe it's 10 out of 10. That's really, really important to me. And on that same scale, then how much do I feel like I'm living in line with that this week or today? 2 out of 10. I'm pretty tired. Can't even bother today. This job's really boring today, or whatever. And so what you've done there is you've opened up a discrepancy between, okay, this is really important to you, but you're not living in line with it. Why? What's going on? Not in a way that you can then be really self-critical, but as a tool to say, my girlfriend's really important to me, but I haven't seen her for 4 weeks. Why? What's stopping me from jumping on a plane right now? Okay, let's do that. And then, when you start to do those things and you're coming back towards your value, the sort of rating for how much you're living in line with it would go up. And so doing that kind of exercise is really just a long-winded way of saying you can look at what's important to you. You can just do a really quick measure up of how much am I living in line with it and what areas of my life do I need to pay attention to because I'm not living in line with it. So it can be kind of quite simple and a fairly quick exercise, really. I was actually watching a video last night and there was a guy on YouTube. I don't know how I managed to stumble across it. The video had like 2,000 views. This is not anybody would know. But he was sat in his car and I found it really fascinating because I don't know whether I should say this or not. But I found it fascinating because he exhibited certain like narcissistic delusions of grandeur in talking about what he wanted to become and what he wanted from his life. And it got me thinking that
it's quite difficult to understand whether something you say or write down or are aiming for is a value, or if it's just based on like an inherent deep childhood born insecurity. Because if you'd asked me at 18 what my values were, I would have said £1 million, a Lamborghini. Like I would have defaulted to these things because those were the things that would have, like, I don't know, scratched my like insecurities, right?
Yeah.
But as I attained those things and had more chance to reflect on what actually makes me feel good and fulfilled and complete, I would have said family, connection, health. Two very different things, right?
Yeah.
One's cause-based, one is just an insecurity. So how do we know the difference?
And you don't, right? Because,
Ouch.
you and it's always a horrible answer, isn't it? But maybe you had that aspiration when you were younger and you went with it because it's all you knew at the time. And then you learnt some, you became more wise, and your values shifted slightly. And that's the thing. That's why I talk about doing sort of quite regular values check-ins, because depending on your life, stage and what you're doing, your circumstances, your values will change. My values transformed when I had children, and probably sort of flipped them upside down really, and that's okay. I could never have known that would be. I couldn't have prioritized my children before they were there anyway, And for example, you might not have been able to know that you would feel differently now. Back then at that age, you didn't have the capacity to do that. You hadn't had the life experience. So it's okay. There isn't this sense of, there is this right path, and if you get on it at 17, you'll be all right. The whole process is a learning process. So it's okay to change direction. It's okay to discover, this is not where I want to be, but I've learned something. Here we go. Let's change direction. Let's go in this direction. And now I've got the knowledge of where I don't want to be.
Speaking of changing direction then, a lot of what's written about how we change direction is you've got to make this like big grand decision in your life, and then today you've got to go in that direction as if it was like a 90-degree turn. And this can be quite terrifying for a lot of people because it's not easy to do. You talk about this in the book, you talk about habits and things like that and how we make change in our life. What have you learned in your experience as a clinical psychologist about how people do actually make meaningful change in direction in their life?
I think something I've learned is that big, meaningful change is not made drastically and quickly. Sustainable change is made carefully, and there's this process of, it's not just action. There is a lot of kind of reflection, and then there's a bit of action, then there's a bit more reflection of like, we tried that, how was it? Do we need to change direction? We keep moving. So it's a kind of bit by bit by bit, but we greatly underestimate how powerful and sustainable that can be when we do it bit by bit and develop habits, for example, and constantly reevaluate and check in on which direction we want to go in. So I think something that I've learned, and certainly actually in my NHS work, for example, the type of work that I was doing, it took time. If someone's really poorly and there's a lot to work through, that takes a long time, and that's okay. That's kind of how we work. It takes time to heal and things like that. So I think I learned to sort of acknowledge that not everything has to be done yesterday.
You also talk a lot about in your book about how we can turn bad days into not so bad days, I guess. And this relationship, which I find really fascinating, between the decisions we make, our mood, and our like actions and behavior, and how they're all like fundamentally linked. And I was thinking, I remember when I was writing my book, having a particular moment where I was in like a not a good mood. And I was trying to understand how to kind of hijack that to get back to a good mood. Do I go for a run? Do I just focus on my actions? Do I have to think my way out of my bad mood? What would you say to all of that? I
think thinking your way out of a bad mood is difficult and often takes quite a bit of practice around using specific skills and stuff like that. Sometimes the quickest way to impact on your mind is through your body. So things like exercise, music, using your voice, like singing and stuff like that. Things like that can create quite big shifts in the moment, but also human connection. So, for example, if you've been kind of pent up and tense, and then, or you felt unsafe, and then someone hugs you and you burst into tears, and it's that kind of shift of emotion. And so, things like human connection, movement, music, you can utilize those to good effect. Different people are different, And so, one thing will work for one person and something different will work for someone else. I don't know. My husband likes to listen to kind of really like old school New York hip hop and stuff, and that puts him in a great mood. It puts me in a terrible mood. I hate it. So it's it kind of, that everyone has a different experience of things like music or exercise. But if you can understand your own experience, what works for you, then definitely then utilize those to create even small shifts in the moment, because a small shift can just change direction, and then other things can help to kind of move it forward.
What about sleep? How important is sleep in terms of our mood and mindset?
Oh, so important, so important. And that's kind of a battle I've been going on because with this kind of work and the demands of creating content alongside having 3 small children, it hasn't been unusual for me to kind of be up in the night with children and then be getting up at 5 to make videos before I take them to school, and just it's not sustainable, that kind of lifestyle. But I notice if I've not had enough sleep for a few days, it will impact on how I feel, and it'll impact on my performance and how effective I am at work and what I'm doing. And so, it's something you just have to take seriously. I think, and something that, I don't know, in our culture, there's this kind of shift towards, what's the saying? Like you sleep when you die and all that rubbish, that kind of, well, you will die sooner if you don't sleep. So, let's weigh this up. So it's one of those things. It feels like when there's more to be done than can be done, it's so tempting all the time to ditch on that bit of extra sleep that would be good for you. But I think it's something that we all have to just always remind ourselves. You got to come back to it, and you got to give your body what it needs.
Do you feel like you've got that balance now?
I think it's always a tightrope, isn't it? Like something will happen and there'll be a late night or an early morning, and that shifts again, and there's no recovery because, children are waking up early and stuff. I think while I've got a balance, I hate the idea that I might perpetuate this notion that I've got it right and that, just do what I do because I've got this perfect life. And it's absolutely not that way. That is something that I think is detrimental, in kind of social media and things like that can really catch people out, is the idea that you look at someone online and you assume that they have it all sorted and that they don't have problems and that they don't struggle with normal human stuff that we all struggle with. And so I've tried to sort of keep that honesty all the way along, that, these are great tools and they really, really help, but it doesn't stop life throwing stuff at you. It doesn't make you invincible. And I say that in the introduction. This isn't the key to a problem-free life. It's an arsenal of tools that you can use to face those problems with that will ensure you can kind of get through it.
Talking about all of that, so, the success you've had and the impact it's had on, your life, and having to wake up sometimes at God knows what time to film a TikTok video. One of the things I read about in psychology is this idea that our motivation can start to diminish when something becomes extrinsically motivated. So when you're paid to do something, your motivation to do the task weirdly diminishes, even if you enjoyed it before being paid to do so. So have you felt that in your life, that now that TikTok and making videos has become work, the motivation to do it is shifting at all? It
can do. I think there's the temptation for it to do that, isn't there, when things shift. And that's why I think it's been so important to me to keep it in mind. I think if I didn't have that initial reason for, I wanted to share this really good information that's usually locked away in the therapy room, I just wasn't me. So it wasn't enough of a pull. I didn't have any interest in being kind of public person, that kind of thing. So it wouldn't have been enough for me to work that hard on it. And it's, as long as I keep that thought or that value in my mind about, sharing knowledge that can help people with their mental health, then that enables me to keep going.
But has it shifted?
What, in terms of becoming less motivated?
Yeah. Or feeling more and more like work?
No, I think there was a period where it felt like just a grind of work when, not the writing, I loved the writing, but then there was obviously this pressure to keep putting content out there, and I can't just disappear for 6 months. And that pressure felt like, but I think that was a symptom of overload, of just, okay, I've got to write a book, I've got to be a mum, and it's lockdown and we're homeschooling, and I've got to get video on every day. And, that for me, that's a sign of overload. And that in turn influences your motivation in the moment. But I guess I'm aware that motivation is something I can't rely on anyway. It's a feeling and it comes and goes. So some days it will feel like a grind, and other days it will feel really exciting, coming to do this and meet you. And that stuff's kind of really wonderful. And some days, I'm in my therapy room on my own with a camera going, oh, got to say something profound now, what, find something. And I think it's awareness of every job has its ups and downs. I can't rely on feeling like it all the time. I have to remember why I started it and the values behind it to keep me going.
Another thing that I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you get asked about all the time, and something you wrote about in chapter 19 of your book, is this topic of confidence. It seems to be at the very heart and core of a lot of issues we have in our lives, the lack of confidence.
Yeah.
But also it seems to be the cause of a lot of good things that happen to us if we have confidence. So people always ask me when I do Q&As and stuff, they say, how do you build confidence? And there was this really lovely quote in your book that I really, really resonated with, that said, confidence cannot grow if we are never willing to be without it. So when people ask you that question, Dr. Julie Smith, what do you say? How do you build your confidence?
Yeah, so I did a video on this recently, actually, where I don't know what we were thinking, but we used kind of balloons with a tube that went between the balloons. And it had this idea that if one of those balloons was confidence and the other one was vulnerability, if you're only ever willing to be with your confidence, so if you're only ever willing to be in the situations where you feel confident, then it can't grow. It can't sort of grow beyond that. Let's say in the pandemic, being at home, you're confident at home, you feel comfortable at home, but being outside, you feel vulnerable. And so it's really hard to go to the supermarket, and it's really hard to go out to a bar with friends now. And if you're not willing to be without that confident feeling that you have when you're at home, then your confidence can't grow. It's not going to grow sitting at home. And that's where in therapy we talk about, the most important stuff is the stuff you do in between sessions in your real life. And so for anyone, I often say to people, if there's something that you really want to master, but it makes you nervous, do it as much as you possibly can in manageable doses, because the thing that you do every day will become your comfort zone. So it will gradually become easier, or you'll become more confident at your ability to do it. But the way that your brain works is through repetition. So the more you do something, the more your brain will get better at automating it for you.
You talk about that same sort of the importance of repetition as it relates to anxiety as well. And I guess maybe this is the answer to the question we were asking at the start about how to deal with all of this noise. Maybe it's just doing more of it.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's getting used to the feedback and what it means and what it says about us and how to cope with it. You build up coping strategies for it over time, don't you? The more you do it. It's probably a mix of that and making clear choices based on your values rather than your feelings about how much of it you want to have. On high pressure moments, one thing that I did recently, which I thought was very interesting and opened my eyes to a whole new world, was I did a breathwork session.
Okay.
Have you ever done breathwork?
Not a huge amount of it, but it's getting more popular, isn't it?
Yeah. And I just got really intrigued by this idea that breath can have a really profound impact on mood, how we're feeling, and specifically, as you write about it in your book, anxiety.
Yeah.
Talk to me about breath and the role it plays and how we can use our breathing to make ourselves feel less anxious.
Sure. So it's one of probably the first things that I will go through with someone, because you'll get people who come along for therapy, and in that first, it takes time, right? You have to get to know each other, and they're trying to communicate their story, and then a whole week goes by before you see each other again. And actually, people often go to therapy when they're in a really bad place, and so they'll often be saying, is there something I can do in between sessions that's going to help me get through to next week? And so if that person is struggling with really high anxiety, that one thing that is very quick to teach that they can take away is something like a breathing exercise, because it's one of the quickest ways that we can, slow the anxiety response. So if you're anxious, your breathing will be fast and shallow. So kind of,
and
if you do that for long enough, you actually start to feel quite panicky. And that's because, your heart and your lungs are connected. So your heart's going to start pounding to get all that oxygen around your body, and you'll kind of start gearing up into action. So if you can slow your breathing down, you can slow the whole process down. I think I mentioned this in the book. I've certainly done videos on it, is sort of box breathing or square breathing, where you can, if you're out and about and you don't want anyone to really know what you're doing, if you're on a bus or at a meeting, pick something like a door or a window or something. It's kind of box shape. And you start with the kind of bottom left corner. And as you kind of trace your eyes up to the top corner, you're just counting in as you breathe in, and it's maybe like 4 seconds. And then as you trace your eyes across the top, that will be a pause. So you're just holding a breath for 4 seconds. And then you come back down with an out breath of 4 seconds and then hold. And so you're just kind of breathing in 4, hold 4, out 4, hold 4. So, and it's just one way of, when you're out, to give you a visual focus that can help you to just monitor, okay, and now I'm breathing in, now I'm breathing out. Because when you're really, really panicking, actually breathing slowly can feel really difficult to do. So you can use that kind of visual. But also more recently, some great research has been coming out about how to kind of, it's helpful to extend the out breath. So if you can, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are. If you can make that out breath longer and more vigorous than your in breath, then that's going to help calm that response fairly quickly.
Why does all of this matter? Because so my girlfriend started talking to me about breath work, and she started studying it. And so I went along kind of reluctantly, what is this nonsense, to this breath work class. And the guy sat me there and started talking to me about the like prehistoric reasons as to why when we're in high stress situations or feeling anxious, our breath changes. And when someone explains it to me in scientific terms, I buy in. And the way he explained it to me, from like, if you're on 10,000 years ago and you're in the savannah of Africa and a lion's running towards you, your body prepares you in many ways for that fight or flight response. And the problem is, in the stimulated, stressful world we live in, we're kind of like living in fight or flight a lot of the time. And so after hearing that from him and practicing a little bit, I've become really, really aware of the fact that when I am stressed, my breath basically, it feels like it's stopped. Like it's so shallow. And so now I override it. And it's been such a revelation in my life to try and override, because you don't see it, you don't know it happens. But for me, I get the alert, which is the feeling of tension in my body and kind of stress. And then I can do something about it. But where does this, was he right? Is that where all this breathing stuff comes from, in like meditation?
Well, yeah, because you can't, you don't have that kind of anxiety off switch, right? Or you can't directly choose to slow your heart rate, but because it's linked to other things that you can influence, you have to use those as avenues in to sort of slow the whole process down. And that's where, we really underestimate things like breath work and slow breathing, because they seem too simple. And like we want something complex, or I
want to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And then we can kind of believe in it. And actually we have the power to do some of these things that make such a difference. And that's really where this whole thing grew out of, was people saying to me in therapy, why on earth has nobody told me this before? This is not rocket science, and it's changing everything. And this is brilliant. I want to tell everyone. I want to, and actually it's a lot of the messages I get is people saying, I've told my nan, I've told my auntie, and we're all doing it together. Thank you so much. This is really, but sometimes they are just really simple things that you then don't forget. And once you've got that tool, you've got it then forever. No one can take that from you.
That's why I wanted to talk about it a lot, is because it's had a big impact on how I feel in those high stress moments. And I just wish someone had said that to me earlier. And yeah, you're right. We're searching for complex solutions to these feelings we have in life. Over the years, from doing this podcast and just general research, it's becoming more and more apparent that really what I need to do is just to live more like a human being. And in fact, the world I'm living in is doing the opposite of that. It's making me live like some kind of cyborg that doesn't have emotions and everything. I mean, you talk about, I think it's chapter 5 of your book, where you talk about the basics and sleep, nutrition, connection. These are all things that exercise. These are all things that human beings have always done. And in fact, the avoidance of those things in the modern world is causing us all of these like symptoms that we're diagnosing as flaws or, signs that we are broken. And I have a chapter in my book which is called just The Journey Back to Human, as if like at some point we took a wrong turning and we actually just need to get back to being humans again. And I felt that in your writing, but I imagine How do you feel about all of that? This idea that we've kind of
Yeah.
abandoned what it is to be human.
Yeah, because it feels like you have to battle to do normal stuff, to do human things. Yeah, exactly.
It's a war.
And it is because of, I guess, the sorts of media that we consume that tell us, you got to do more and be more and have more and earn more and spend more, and it's sort of this treadmill that keeps speeding up, and everyone's going, why am I so worn out? Like, what's going on? And then they blame themselves for feeling worn out, when actually it's this environment and all these kind of pressures that sort of make that worse. And so, yeah, I mean, and that's where, like when you ask me about kind of, what's next and how do you cope with all that, it always has to come back to, we're in privileged positions, right? Where it can feel like you don't have choice. You have to just keep going. But actually, the thing about privilege is that you then get to choose what's going to be most healthy for me here, what's going to be most meaningful and give me the life that I want to have. And so that you're basing your decisions on your own values rather than somebody else's.
It's very true. And I think that's maybe one of the thoughts that is quite liberating from the potential stress of the situation, which is it is always a choice. And you have so much, you'd probably rather have the choice.
Yeah.
Right? Because else you'd probably still be striving to get to a position of privilege and choice.
Because there are people that don't have choice, right? And that's where something else I talk about in the book is about how people talk about, just eliminate your stress. And say that to the single mum who works 40 hours a week to keep a roof over a kid's head, or, that lots of stresses can't be chosen, or maybe you're waiting for results from the doctor about some test you had, and the stress is just hanging over you. Those sorts of stresses, you don't choose those. They're a normal part of life, and there are tools to kind of deal with those. But when there is, there will be certain parts of life where we can say yes or no, and that's when we need to exercise that control, I think.